What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, November 15th, 2016, halfway through the month, and we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In fact, I'm probably not going to be able to take a lot of phone calls. I'm just going to give you that warning up front. And we've got, again, a lot of stuff to talk about here. Mike is in our control room and keeping us out of trouble here. Now, Barack Obama has finally started making noises in support, or at least in acceptance of Donald Trump's presidency. And he's out there saying, you might as well get used to it. Trump is going to be the next president. Hillary Clinton lost. You might as well deal with it. And everybody is still looking for ways to explain away this devastating defeat for the presumed establishment president without having to acknowledge any of the real causes, which was Hillary Clinton's long history of crimes and corruptions and all the questions hanging over her head from the email server scandal and the Clinton Foundation scandal and all the rest of that. And so now the latest spin is, well, Trump was able to tap into a troubling strain of rhetoric to win the U.S. election. Now, Obama is off on his legacy tour of Europe. His last visit to Europe as president, he's going around visiting all these countries, making all these speeches, all of which are intended to cement his place in the history books. And he's out there, though, still pushing the globalist agenda and this idea of nationalism. Obama describes it as troubling. It's a troubling strain of populism. How dare we have a populist sentiment in this country? You're all supposed to be globalists now. And he even went on out and said that the majority of the American people are still supportive of globalism. And he's trying to rewrite what the history books are going to say about him. But worse, he is basically committing a diplomatic faux pas. Because traditionally, as power is transitioned in this country peacefully, the outgoing president is very nice to the incoming president. There's a tacit agreement not to criticize the new president by the old president for at least a year. But here we have Obama is already trying to undermine Donald Trump's nationalist agenda before Trump can even get into the White House, trying to salvage that whole new world order. And some people are asking if Obama is out there just making a joke for him to come on out there and saying that the healthy majority of Americans agree with my worldview on many things, just a week after the biggest loss for the Democratic Party in decades. And then Obama came out with a quote, we've got to guard against a rising crude nationalism. So do you hear that? What's coming out of Obama? A love of your country first and foremost is now considered crude. And that's why you're all deplorables. And that's why we shouldn't listen to you anymore. We know what's best, a global economic empire. Now, Obama's tour is not going very well. Many of the countries that he is visiting, the ordinary people have suffered greatly under the advances of globalism and the refugee crisis and the rest of it. There are a lot of protests, and the Greek police actually had to use tear gas against demonstrators protesting Obama's visit to Athens. There were 7,000 people in the streets of central Athens protesting Obama. They don't want him there. They figure he's lost his job, get on out and go golfing or something. Over in Germany, the Berlin police are already starting to tighten up security ahead of Obama's visit there. Now, let's get back to these protests that are going on here in the United States. Certainly, I don't know what Soros thinks he's doing. Maybe he's just throwing a tantrum because he didn't get what he wanted. And like all money junkies, he tends to be very spoiled. He's used to always getting his way. And this time he didn't. And so he's funding all these left-wing anarcho-terrorists trying to sabotage Trump, undermine his victory, and basically at the risk of overthrowing the entire republic, a color revolution. And Dave Hodges did an interview with Mike Adams talking about this. It's over on YouTube, a 1-hour discussion. That Soros is literally attacking our government. I mean, he lives here in New York. There's a protest planned outside of his home in New York for Saturday. Why isn't this guy being elected? If I were to come on out and advocate for the violent overthrow of the American government, I would be arrested and taken away. So why isn't Soros? Because he's not just advocating for it. He's out there writing checks to back it all. The purple revolution, the color revolution. Now, and I'll tell you what, he's going to fail. He is going to fail for a very, very simple reason. These color revolutions in other countries have worked in the past because the general population was able to be propagandized into thinking that those who were committing the acts of violence and trying to overthrow the government were working on their behalf. Here in the United States, that's not the public perception. They're seeing all of these bought and paid for rioters as crybabies, spoiled brats, sore losers, committing these acts of violence. They're not getting the support of ordinary Americans for what they're doing, and that's why this attempt at a color revolution is not going to be able to work. They're alienating the very people they would need to get the color revolution to work. Remember, they tried it in Iran in 2009, and it failed because the Iranian people knew that those who were causing this ruckus were not working in Iran's best interests, but in the interests of the West and the money junkies and the oil companies and so forth. We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just rejoining our network. We're talking about Soros' plans for a color revolution here in the United States of America and the reasons why it is likely to fail. And Soros and Western interventions in these other countries does have a high failure rate, roughly 50%. They're only batting 500 on these things. And I don't think they're going to get the traction here that they need to do. Now, the corporate media coverage of all these protests is, of course, very biased. Oh, these people out there, these illegal immigrants, they're just fighting for their right to stay in this country. Well, corporate media, illegal immigrants don't actually have a right to stay in this country. You're just making that up out of thin air. CNN angered a lot of their own people by mocking the Trump supporters who are being attacked. Say, oh, those poor white people, how bad for them. Ha, 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 ha. CNN drew a lot of criticism for that. Isn't violence wrong in all cases? Or are you making a big stink about violence only when it's being done by white people to black people? Because you don't seem to find a lot of reports of black-on-black violence, which is the majority in the corporate media, and you hardly ever see a mention of when there's black violence on white people. It's very filtered to push this racial agenda to try and split the nation. Now, there's a story over in thelastgreatstand.com where they're warning that Soros is leading Trump into a serious no-win situation, because if Soros is able to split the country and start a civil war, it almost doesn't matter how the war ends. Trump is going to carry that as his historical legacy. He was president during a civil war that was sparked, we will be told, by his election victory. And here's where it gets really interesting. Most of this violence that you are seeing is coming out of the city of Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon. And everybody up there is scratching their heads because Portland went to Hillary. They voted for Hillary. Why are you protesting Donald Trump's victory in Portland, Oregon? Well, it may have something to do with the fact that for whatever reason, the police are standing down. They're just standing back and letting the rioters do whatever they want to do. Smash windows, burn cars, whoop on pregnant women with a baseball bat, all the stuff that they've been doing. And again, Portland voted for Hillary. Why are you wrecking that city? Well, because there you can do it. And the counterpoint to that is apparently some of Soros' hired thugs tried to start a riot down in Texas. And they were committing property damage. The police arrested one of them. Some of these other protesters surrounded the police to force them to let the one guy who was arrested go. And that's when they found out you don't mess with those people in Texas. They deserve their reputation for toughness, and a lot of these hired thugs got face planted onto the cement and handcuffed and hauled on off, treated like the criminals that they actually are. And you didn't see that on the corporate media because they don't want anything to discourage these hired Trump protesters. They got the Craigslist lads out there. Come on over, it'll be fun. You get to smash things and burn cars, and you won't be arrested, and so forth and so on. And it really is getting ridiculous. Over in the Twin Cities, a woman got arrested for driving under the influence. She was drunk. She ran into 2 other cars. Her blood alcohol level was way over the Minnesota's legal limit. And she said, oh, this is all because of President Trump. I'm so upset at his election. That's why I got drunk and got in my car and got into a crash. I mean, it's ridiculous. Up in Canada, there's a Jewish activist who found, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, a swastika sprayed on the front of her office, and she's saying, Trump's election is effectively permission for the white supremacists and the racists and the anti-Semites to do this thing. And I'm willing to wager a plugged Turkish lira right now that that's another hate crime hoax, because when they catch the perpetrators out there spraying swastikas on things, it usually turns out to be the victim. Let's grab a couple of phone calls. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just wanted to point out the contrast just about right now. 8 years ago when Obama had been elected, and nobody was rioting. The Republicans had lost, the conservatives had lost, but nobody was rioting, and the media was so euphoric that they awarded him the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course he turned out to be a complete warmongering a-hole. And here we have Trump, who hasn't made one decision, made really any appointments, and they are rioting in the streets. The president will not really disavow it. The candidate will really not disavow the violence. I'm talking about Hillary.
Yes.
And, and what does he want to do? He wants to normalize relations with Russia and China when Mr. Nobel Prize had pushed us almost to the point of war. I mean, it's really absurd, Mike, really.
Well, let me back up here a little bit, because even though I actually thought Obama was a slightly better choice than John McCain, I'm not willing to take the step to say that he actually won his election. When you go back at all the election fraud that has surfaced, whether it was Florida in 2000, Kennedy stealing it from Nixon, Nixon stealing his reelection, and all the fraud we saw today, how do we know that Barack Obama was just not a successful election thief in 2008 and 2012? We can't know that because our election system is not set up to actually verify what the people's choice was. We're in a situation right now where we know that some 3 million illegal immigrants voted, 1.2 million dead votes. Nobody's got any way of knowing how many of those computerized votes that were put for Donald Trump were flipped over to Hillary Clinton. We don't know because the system is set up to not allow people to double-check what's going on. And until we have an election system that allows us to double-check and verify what's going on, we can't say for certainty whether any election was actually won by anybody. As opposed to having had several decades of, we're being ruled by the most successful election thief. Remember what Stalin said. People who vote decide nothing. People who count the votes decide everything. And it seems since we've adopted so many of the other bad traits of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Union in our government, our election system, we can't assume Obama actually won. And I wanted to make that point. Now, he's had his 2 terms in office. He's headed for retirement. But we do know there's been massive fraud in this election, but there wasn't enough to overcome a landslide by the American people, and that's why they're freaking out. We have a political establishment that has gotten used to the idea that they can fake the elections, election after election after election after election, and keep the high offices for themselves, and all of a sudden, the American people just broke free, and they don't know how to deal with that, and that's why they're throwing all these tantrums.
Well, what we do know for sure, you're right, we don't know the results of the election because it is so opaque, but we do know that we have proof, absolute proof, that the Bernie Sanders primary was rigged. And we also have absolute proof in contrast to the way the Republicans, when they lost in '08, and how they're handling the loss, the Democrats are handling the loss now. I mean, that's apparent for everybody to see.
Well, it's not just that we have evidence that Bernie Sanders was cheated in the primaries. The DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz's own lawyers down in Florida are trying to get the courts to drop a class action lawsuit by Bernie Sanders supporters who are demanding refunds of all the money they gave to the Democratic Party. And these lawyers in court before the judge said, yeah, of course we were throwing it to Hillary Clinton. And those Sanders supporters should have understood that. Therefore, they're not entitled to refunds. I mean, the lawyers for the ringleaders are out there admitting in court, yes, they rigged the primaries for Hillary Clinton. She should never have been on that ballot.
You know, Mike, this morning, my wife, who's African-American, came in, and she's, of course, it's been very divisive, this whole election within our household, but she comes in and she is totally worried that Trump signals the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And I went, based on what? What possibly? You're listening to MSNBC, but look how wrong they were the whole election. Look how misinformed you were the whole election, and now you're believing this. And by the way, why would he do that? One or two of his family are Jewish. You know, the Ku Klux Klan is not wild about them either. So, you know, I mean, anyways.
Well, let me give you the argument that I've found to be most effective so far. When I've got somebody who's out there saying, you know, I need all I need to know because I listen to NPR or CNN or everything, and I said, you remember how the Nazis used to use the newspapers and the radio to lie to their people about how their leaders were really good and you just had to go along with the government agenda? And they'll say, yeah, I remember. Okay, do you remember how in Stalin's Soviet Union they used the newspapers and the radio to lie to their people about how wonderful their leaders were and how they just had to go along with, the government's agenda? So, yeah, okay. Why do you think that the U.S. government under the Clintons is behaving any differently? And that usually brings them up short, and some of them will just get thoughtful, and the others will just say a lot of bad words at me, some of them in a foreign language, and stomp their feet and, head for the exit.
Well, I am reluctant, but I will point this out. But the black community, which is being used by Soros, is the most useful of the useful idiots to these people, the most willingly used and the most willingly agitated and brought into play.
Soros actually said that in an actual interview. He was being interviewed, and he said the black community is the easiest to manipulate.
Yeah, well, it really is. But she won't let my wife will not listen to stuff like that, and she's a Rachel Maddow MSNBC junkie.
Well, there's an interesting article that we have on WhatReallyHappened.com by a hardcore liberal who voted for Trump because their observation was that back in the 1960s, liberals really did represent the intellectual elite. The aware, the educated, the paying attention. But over the last 30 years, people who want to be seen as intellectuals adopt the liberal label, even though they aren't really very intellectual at all. And that was certainly the case with our friend over on the other side of the island, who's absolutely convinced that she knows everything that's going on in the world because she listens to NPR. And if she doesn't know something, it's not worth knowing. These people are not intellectual elites. They're, in fact, very narrow-minded and uninformed, but they're arrogant in their ignorance. They believe they're intellectually superior, and therefore they should not have to listen to you.
Mike, I'll let you go, but I can do this in 15 seconds. The guy, not Creamer, not Robert Creamer, but the other guy that Project Veritas had extensively and cheating and all that stuff on their tapes. Well, I can't, Vogel or something like that.
Yes.
He apparently is all over Twitter, or was, and they canceled his account, saying that basically these people are Soros people, the rioters that are going on now, and I wish somebody would give him a forum to talk about it. He'd be a really interesting guy.
Meanwhile, Twitter is letting the assassinate Trump and rape Melania tags surge on up because obviously that's freedom of speech. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you, Peter. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones here, a couple of things. First of all, I'm looking at the news. They're still covering all these protests, and I find it absolutely laughable to see all these illegal immigrants out there with their Mexican flags screaming, "Donald Trump is not my president." You're right, he isn't. Your president is a little further south. And I have a recommendation to anybody in the United States of America who wants to say Donald Trump is not your president. If that's the way you truly feel, leave the country. Because Donald Trump won the election under the rules by which everybody agreed to play going on in. He overcame the election fraud. He overcame all those illegal immigrants who voted and weren't supposed to try and put Hillary over the top. But if you're going to be in this country, then you're going to have to work within our system. It's just like Teddy Roosevelt said. You come here, you speak our language, you follow our laws. Donald Trump won the election. If you really feel you cannot live with the Donald Trump presidency, you can go to the border right now. Just a quick reminder, if you step into Mexico without asking their permission, they will put you in jail down there. All right, George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike? Thing is, I was in a reading, watching a video. I couldn't really catch what comedian Wanda Sykes was saying, but she got booed off stage. I really think people are getting sick and tired of the anti-Trump rhetoric.
I think they are, and I think they're getting sick and tired of Hollywood liberalism. And again, this article that I was talking about is saying what happened is back in the 60s, the liberals really were the intellectual elite. But since then, anybody who wants to just have a holier-than-thou, I'm automatically superior to you, they say, I'm a liberal. Even if they're not intellectual, even if their college degree is in indigenous women's interpretive dance or something, they wear the label so they can feel good. I'm a liberal. I know what's going on. And yet every time they open their mouth, it's very clear they're totally clueless. They're what Stalin used to describe as the useful idiots, and there do seem to be way too many of them running around this country right now.
Well, the thing is, I would like to start up a petition, even though I know you're not a Super Bowl fan, but Lady Gaga is supposed to be performing a halftime show at the Super Bowl in Houston, and I think the people in Houston ought to get a petition telling the NFL, we don't want Lady Gaga, the woman that supported Hillary that's into spirit cooking. You don't need that kind of stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what, all we have to do is start making noises about, not watching the Super Bowl game on TV, and they'll get that message because the Super Bowl is like the peak event. All of the advertisers spend huge amounts of money to get in there, and if they start hearing that people are going to be turning off the Super Bowl because of Lady Gaga, I guarantee you they will come on down and say, okay, get somebody else in there. This is a time to start dictating policy with our wallets.
Well, another thing, I noticed the county next door, you've probably seen a video of the mother throwing a little 8-year-old boy out of the house because he voted Trump in a mock election at school.
Yes.
Well, she's getting a backlash in her community. And this is in Fort Bend County, the next county next to me.
Well, it's not just the backlash from the community. She's now under investigation for child endangerment. The child has been taken over by the social services. And, I think a lot of these people who are getting caught up in this hysteria movement are going to get a cold wake-up call. They're going to get the ice bucket challenge in the face when they realize that what they're doing is illegal. They're violating the Patriot Act. They're violating Title 18 section after section. And they're out there literally committing felonies, and they're talking about revolt against the government. These are very, very serious crimes, and they seem to be running around thinking it's okay to be doing this because somebody somewhere told them nothing bad's going to happen to you.
Well, the thing is, these protesters ever heard of the Insurrection Act?
Absolutely.
I mean, because this is an insurrection. This is not a protest. This is an insurrection. And like I say, we in Texas, we have guns, and believe me, they tried that down here, and not only in Houston, but in San Antonio and in Dallas, and people were concealing carries, and not here. So
yeah, they got slapped down pretty hard by the police down there, and that's a good thing. And it sort of underscores the fact that for whatever reason, the police in Portland, Oregon have been told to stand down and let these people cause as much damage as they can for the benefit of the corporate media cameras.
Well, I would just say all these protests are happening, these insurrections are happening where the cities are disarmed too, so
yeah.
people cannot defend it. So
you noticed that, did you? All right. Well, listen, George, we're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to take a commercial. We got a few more phone calls waiting, and then we're going to close the lines because I got a bunch of news I need to get out there today. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a few more phone calls, then we're going to close the phone lines because I got a lot of stuff to share with you today. We're going to go to Jim in Honolulu. Aloha, brah. What's up?
I had two things I wanted to talk to you. I hope you could address or comment on. One is actually involving the polls from the election, and the other one involving Hillary. Regarding the polls, they've been, the mainstream media has been basically saying that they got it wrong and they've been backpedaling and all that. And, if you think about it, looking at what both Trump and Clinton, where they, what their internal polls were focusing, for them to focus their efforts on the battleground state that they were doing, particularly, Clinton's polls, internal polls, because obviously they were telling her a different message than what the mainstream media polls were doing.
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that the mainstream media polls, they knew exactly what was going on, and they were just basically feeding the public. They took a position to go and feed the public, the positive stuff that they were trying to spit out there in order to, demoralize perhaps, Trump supporters and all that in the process. It was a ill-planned strategic move by the media to do that. But I can't believe that knowing that what the internal polls were doing and forcing both the camps their efforts to do, the mainstream media was still spitting out their side of it, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you're absolutely correct here. It was not a mistake. Despite what the corporate media is saying today, it wasn't an error, it wasn't a goof. We knew, even from the corporate media's own admission, they were deliberately oversampling their polls among people they knew or expected were going to be supporting Hillary Clinton. They were oversampling Democrats over Republicans almost 2-1. They were oversampling into women and minorities until those numbers started to soften. This was intentional fraud by the corporate media. And I've been saying all along, polls come in two flavors. There are the internal polls that are trying to accurately find out what's going on. And yes, in the last few weeks of the campaign, they were painting a very dim picture for Hillary Clinton, which triggered some fights among her and her staff. The external polls do not exist to measure public opinion, but to try and shape it by convincing us that all of our friends and neighbors are going to go vote for Hillary Clinton, so really you ought to do it as well. You don't want to be the standout in trying to rely on herd instinct to just corral everybody to go along with it. And it really didn't work this time because the American public don't trust the corporate media. Only 6% of them still trust that corporate media. And, of course, the corporate media is now declaring war on the independent media. They're out there saying, well, they're all the fake news, and the fake news is why Hillary didn't win. And Google is now going to start punishing fake news websites by pulling their ads. All kinds of stuff. This is the beginning of an outright battle between the corporate media and the truth. And they're starting from a weak position to begin with, so I don't think they're going to be all that successful.
Exactly. My other comment, if you have just a moment, it was involving Hillary. In the 60 Minutes interview, Trump seemed to indicate he was going to sort of back off. I know perhaps it was just to leave that initial impression, to not pursue things with her and the crimes and so forth that she and that she's done, as well as the foundation. Hold it. First of all, somebody's putting words in Trump's mouth. What he said was that the Clintons are good people, and they took that to mean that, he's going to back off. Well, what Trump is trying to do is to get away from the accusations that are already flying that any prosecution of Hillary and her people is going to be done in a spirit of revenge. So he's trying to basically counter that. He didn't say that he's not going to prosecute, and we're hearing again that, yes, in point of fact, Trey Gowdy's going to be the new Attorney General. Congress is still moving forward with their investigations. There are at least 5 FBI investigations that are going on. And when James Comey is replaced as head of the FBI, I want to see who Trump is going to put in there. But we could see these prosecutions go forward. Trump's goal is to reassure the American people these prosecutions are because of real crimes and not because he's out there taking revenge for what happened during the campaign.
And for anybody who's been studying what's been going along, we know that's the case here because the Clintons' crimes go back way, way before Donald Trump.
That's my point. You, I guess, kind of said what I was going to mention. I think, this needs to be done. It's because not only, the people that supported Trump definitely made that part of their plea, the chants and all the public speaking engagements, regarding that. But also, I think it will hopefully dispel all these people who seem to feel that Hillary, this election and all this stuff, all these, people protesting along that may continue. If they do find, substantial, and they can literally come out and show that she was this criminal activity, maybe it'll help subside all this flow. It seems to be that,
Okay, Jim, unfortunately, for some reason, our phone connection is really starting to come apart, but let me do a couple of comments. I think successful prosecutions of Hillary and her people are probably going to cause people who were just sort of on the fringes to reevaluate what they were believing in, what the media told them. The hardcore liberal supporters, there's no way to get through them. In fact, they remind me very much of when I worked in Germany in 1980. There was still these ancient Nazis still wandering around asking for spare change and insisting Hitler never did anything wrong. And that's an artifact of the personality cult. The hardcore people, they can't admit to themselves that they were wrong. And that's an aspect of liberalism. If you're an intellectual elite, you must always be right. And therefore, if you were always right, then the candidate you believed in has to always be right. And they're going to get really, really defensive and really, really angry, and we need to, set up a little game preserve to put them all in so they can't harm anybody around them. But the hardcore true believers, there is absolutely nothing that you can show them. You could show them a video of Hillary Clinton dropping live kittens into a blender, and they would be absolutely certain that she was campaigning for safety in kitchen appliances.
That's interesting. Last thought, and I'll leave it with you, and I'll go because I know you got callers. The chief of staff that Trump has picked. I heard another comment on, I guess I can't remember the station that was maybe on TV that I was watching. That one angle on that might be that Trump wanted to keep this in. Obviously he's got his good points that Trump sees, I guess, but Trump also wanted to keep him basically within his reach. Sometimes when you have a person who's more antagonistic, who had maybe back in the day when he didn't support Trump and all that, Trump, having this balance that he's got now between the two, keeping the individual on board would be better than to basically because you can keep.
Okay, all right, Jim, I'm going to have to let you go because for some reason this phone connection is really, really bad, and you're dropping out an awful lot here. I think Trump is already thinking about his next campaign 4 years from now. I think he wants Priebus close at hand. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But more important, by making Priebus chief of staff, it opens up the GOP to new leadership coming on in who is not going to be as antagonistic to Donald Trump. And I think that's a smart move on his part.
Not to worry about the establishment getting on board then through him.
Something like that, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And we're going to switch over to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Donald Trump is not my president. Okay, no, I'm just joking about that.
Well, because you're up in Canada.
That's pretty funny.
You're up in Canada.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm not going to tell you it's not Donald Trump. Okay. So I got to say, I'm really upset with Bloomberg News. There's a link on Drudge Report about something to do with populism, and they got a video that pops up right away. And the first thing it is it's a video clip of Donald Trump taken out of context, and Donald Trump says, quote, Donald J. Trump will stop all Muslim immigration. Okay, that's the end of it. That's it. Now, what that came from is when Donald Trump was complaining about the dishonest media, and he said that the media, he said, I said I will stop some of the high-risk Muslim immigration for a temporary period of time, but when I get home and I look at the news, it says Donald J. Trump says will stop all Muslim immigration. It's like, I thought that the media would be ashamed of themselves right now. Like if you get caught in a total lie with your hand in the cookie jar, but like you get caught trying like treason against the people, lying to the people, shouldn't you be ashamed for a few minutes and just like be quiet?
No. When you get a job in the corporate media, your shame is surgically removed. And despite the recent mea culpas and apologies that we're getting from Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and all the rest of it saying, yes, we were wrong and we promised to do better, they're right back to doing what it is they are paid to do, which is to try and control the minds of America. And remember, the reason the corporate media is paid the huge amounts of money that they're making is to sell you a war, a policy, a candidate, vaccines, GMO, global warming, whatever. If they stop doing that, the big money goes away. And because of that, the corporate media can't stop being the corporate media. That's all that they know how to do. That's all that they can make money at. Those of us who are here in the independent media, we're not getting rich, by any stretch of the imagination. We're not getting famous. We're out here doing the job that the corporate media is supposed to do. We're acting as watchdogs on government abuse, and we're calling the corporate media to account for its deceptions, which is why now the corporate media is out here declaring all of us in the independent media to be fake news. Oh, they're the fake news broadcasters. And I got to tell you, that really irritates me, because the corporate news was the ones who told you about Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Lusitania not carrying weapons, human-caused global warming, and they have the gall to say we're the fake news?
Well, let me just ask you this. Who was telling us the fake polls, and who was telling us the real polls?
That's exactly it.
Right? So obviously, right? So these guys have no shame. They're not even intelligent. And look, if they can't pull this off when they've got the entire backing of a president on their side, of a justice system on their side, of the FBI on their side, everyone all corrupt on their side, if they still can't pull it off and we still expose them and we still defeat them, can you imagine how little hope they have now after a huge defeat, a huge demoralization for their base, a huge confidence boost for the truth movement, and a president that actually represents the people for once? They are toast. Now, I want to say something here about collaborators. Now, these guys, okay, if we have investigations and we find severe criminal activity in like obstruction of justice charges going against the FBI leadership, if we have like major treasonous type of charges coming against Obama and Hillary, which is possible, then we're going to be looking at collaborators. And now the media that knowingly suppressed information, knowingly knowingly lied to us to protect the criminals, they're going to be liable, even if they didn't personally assault anybody or personally steal or rape or pillage. The fact that they're lying and covering up for the people that are committing those obvious crimes, they're going to go down too.
You're absolutely right there. I mean, let me get a point in here. They're accessories after the fact to all these crimes being committed. Every single case where the corporate media was made aware that a crime had been committed and refused to report it, technically they're guilty of misprision of that crime. 22 years ago when I went to my friends who were in the West Coast hubs for the network news, ABC, CBS, NBC, and I went in there with all this information proving that there was fraud in the FBI's investigation of the death of Vince Foster, and they all said, oh, no, I can't touch it. It's my job if I do that. They knew, and they didn't report it. Technically, that would be considered misprision of the crime here. And, of course, the recent release by the FBI of their file on the Vince Foster case validated all of the observations I made 22 years ago. The gun found with the body didn't fire the shots that killed Vince Foster. Okay, then what gun did? I mean, the whole thing is really out there. And that's another reason why they're out there still pushing this. They're trying to hold this whole system together. And I think they're thinking they've really only got until January 20th to do it because, they were all expecting by supporting Hillary Clinton that Hillary Clinton was going to crush down this upstart independent media that has been stealing so much of their audience away. They're not going to get that now. And the fact that Trump has brought in Bannon as his advisor, he's obviously sympathetic to the independent media because he came out of Breitbart. And so
Right.
there is a seismic change coming, and the corporate media sees itself as fighting for its very life, and therefore there is no sin too great for them to try and commit.
Right, and now that we're at the end game, I'd like to give a friendly cautionary word of advice to everybody who's calling for the assassination of Donald Trump, is that if Donald Trump gets assassinated, I'm not going to condone it, but I'm just giving you a warning. People outside of our control and outside of the truth movement's ability to put a leash on are going to be coming after you, personally, physically, at your houses. Everybody who's publicly calling for the assassination, you had better change course and do everything you possibly can to protect Trump right now and to discourage this, because even if you're not guilty of it, you're going to get it. You're going to get it.
I mean, here's the situation. Everybody who's out there on social media calling for the assassination of Donald Trump are committing a felony under Title 18, Section 879. It's a Class D felony. It carries major jail time. Right now, the laws applying to the president, threats against his life, now apply equally to Donald Trump. And that's one of the things that is so dangerous about all these liberals who are out there screaming all this stuff, is they're out there just flagrantly violating the laws of this country, and somebody somewhere has told them they're never going to be held to account for it. Well, I think under Trey Gowdy as AG, and certainly I don't expect James Comey to have his job past January 20th either. And especially if something actually does happen to Donald Trump, all these people who made these threats on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and everything are going to be rounded up and said, you're going to have to go to court. You're going to have your day in court for threatening the life of the president-elect.
Right. Do you remember that Domer, that one rogue person with a gun shooting some police officers? And how it shut down like an entire city and created a panic all over the country? Okay, now, we're not a paid mob. If we feel like the rule of law has been so eroded that our country is being stolen from us after the assassination of Trump, there is a chance that a certain amount of us are going to break the law, but it's not going to be a paid mob of teenagers that don't know why they're out there. It's going to be a couple of crazy rogue snipers with military training surgically coming after the ringleaders. It's not going to be
it could actually be a civil war. If they take out Trump, that could trigger a civil war. Gotta let you go, Jim. Aloha, brah. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back with the last two phone calls. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines because I got a bunch of stuff I need to get out here. Tim in Wyoming, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to mention, you were talking about citizenship and how people should only they have allegiance to their own country, the country they live in or the country they came from and they're visiting somewhere else. Teddy Roosevelt actually said about people with dual citizenship, which happens to be a big part of our population today. People with dual citizenship have no loyalty to either country.
Yes,
I think that it's a paraphrasing of what he said. But
I've got the exact quote right here in front of me. In the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he is an American but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room here for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. Theodore Roosevelt, 1907.
Ah, that's perfect. That's great. I think I remember reading that once upon a time, but that's awesome that you had that at your fingertips and tip of your brain, so to speak.
It's a big computer.
Yeah, the computer too. Yeah, Google found it for you.
No, I actually have a graphic of it in my images directory, and I just brought that up. But it is a great quote. Roosevelt said so many things. absolutely agree with. His speech on the arena, that the person who's in there doing the work should get all the credit and not the one sitting up on the side saying, oh, he could have done it better, he could have done this, he could have done that. And that applies to Donald Trump as well. We've got all these, liberals and everything are whining and crying about how things could have been different. Well, they aren't. This contest was decided by the people who actually got out there and voted, those who actually got out there and kept putting out the truth about what the candidates really were in the face of deception by the corporate media. And now the corporate media is playing Monday morning quarterback and saying, well, something went wrong, but it's not our fault, and you should go back to trusting us.
That's exactly what I was about to say, about the Monday morning quarterback. You got that ahead of me. The fact of the matter is, when people are sitting in the stands and watching the contest go on, you should do it this way, that way, the other way. Well, get out there and help.
Absolutely. That's why I'm not a big fan of spectator sports. The last spectator sport I had any interest in was synchronized swimming, but then my favorite team drowned.
Yeah, the same thing about people who play water polo except their ponies drown, right?
Yeah, right. All right, well, listen, Tim, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Phone lines are closed. We need to get some news out there and some commentary about what's going on. Now, the founder of Gab, CEO Andrew Torba, has been banned from Y Combinator's directory and community after several members of the group claimed that Torba's defense of Donald Trump made them feel unsafe, which is ridiculous. It's Hillary's supporters committing all the violence. It's Trump supporters who are getting beaten up. But in the twisted little worldview of the liberals, oh, I feel unsafe because I've got somebody who likes Donald Trump around me. Well, the old saying, location, 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 and they really ought to be paying attention to what they're doing before they do it. Because California is just one of a few states where discrimination based on political affiliation or activity is illegal, and Torba has got one heck of a lawsuit on his hands. So, now the other day we were talking about how votefraud.org had gone through a database of voters for this election and determined that at least 3 million non-citizens voted in this last election, overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton, because that's who they were soliciting. Remember, Obama came on out and said, you illegals, go ahead and vote. It's your right to vote. No, it isn't. Illegal non-citizens are not allowed to vote in our elections. 3 million of them did. So you've got to knock that 3 million off of Hillary's vote total before you start screaming who won the popular vote. Then there's the dead voters and the computer switching voters and all the rest of that. Now, there's another group. Now, votefraud.org is affiliated with the Cincinnati-based Citizens for a Fair Vote Count. They've been around since 1996. They didn't just pop up today. They're joining with an organization out of Houston called True the Vote, and I've heard about them. They do a lot of good work. They are now filing legal action against everybody who allowed non-citizens to vote in this election. I hope it achieves a class action status, and it ought to. Now, somebody just sent me a couple of screen caps about how the media are still dragging their feet regarding the final election result. And as of right now, even though Michigan ended its election officially and declared Trump the winner over the weekend, it's still not showing up on the displays, whether it's Google or CNN or whatever. And Associated Press has just decided they're not going to declare an outcome for Michigan while there's a possibility there might be a recount. They're going to sit on the totals and wait for something to happen. Now, I'll tell you right now what's going to happen, and this is based on the rioting. Hillary Clinton doesn't dare ask for a recount in Michigan or anywhere else. In fact, we've already seen, she is not making any mention of election fraud. Because if she were to launch an investigation into election fraud, it's going to reveal that Hillary's campaign was the overwhelmingly guilty party in all this election fraud. 3 million illegal immigrants, 1.2 million dead people, and all of that. That's why she won't go near that issue. She's trying to reverse the election by creating an armed insurrection in the streets of America aided by George Soros. Now then, despite all of their apology and really we did wrong and you can come back and trust us, the corporate media are still playing all their games. Apparently, Donald Trump gave an extended interview to CBS News, which included a very powerful message to all those rioters and protesters. And CBS edited the interview to focus on Obamacare and any other ways that they could make Donald Trump look bad. Now, CBS had, obviously, the ability to release these clips and help calm down the violence that took place over the weekend, but they refused. What part of the election is over does corporate media not yet understand? And they're still out there trying to say, well, Hillary won the popular vote. That's not how our elections are being run. Or Donald Trump would have run his campaign differently. In fact, Donald Trump has come on out and said, if the election were based on total popular vote, he would have focused his campaigns in New York, Florida, and California and won even larger outcome. Donald Trump was playing by the rules everybody agreed to play by. He wasn't going after huge vote totals. He was going after electors, and he won them. Now, with regard to that caller talking about internal versus external polls, it is very obvious that in the closing days of the campaign, the internal polls were showing that Hillary was in trouble. We're seeing a story that's being reported in the Daily Mail. You're not going to see it here in the United States media, but over in the Daily Mail they're reporting that there was apparently a big, huge fight between Bill and Hillary Clinton over just why her campaign was struggling. And it apparently ended with Bill Clinton so angry he literally threw his phone off the roof of his Arkansas penthouse. And Hillary, of course, was out there trying to blame FBI Director James Comey for the slump in her polls. And I have a message to Hillary Clinton, and I know she has people monitoring this show. If Hillary Clinton and her staff had been following the rules and regulations, there would have never been an FBI investigation in the first place. You did this to yourself. Deal with it. Now, we're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. And we're talking about politics in this second hour. We are not taking phone calls because I got a lot of material that I need to get through today. Now, there's another report that's come on out in a couple of different outlets. Political Insider for one, NorthCrane.com for another. Remember how on election night Hillary Clinton failed to come on out and do a concession speech? She did one the next morning that kind of, dressed in purple, and she was an hour, 8 minutes late for that one. And it's being reported that Hillary had a full-on violent meltdown on election night, described as straight-up Hitler in the bunker, and apparently physically assaulted Podesta to the point where Hillary Clinton had to be physically restrained. Now, remember what we said about her out-of-control temper and what a danger that would be for that kind of a temper to have the keys to the nuclear weapons. This only validates it. Apparently, a CNN reporter who was there is saying off the record, CNN's not covering it, but yeah, there was a physical assault by Hillary Clinton against Podesta. Now, Obama is out there acknowledging that Hillary Clinton is to blame for her own loss, but he's still dodging the issue. Obama's out there saying the Democrats have to reevaluate how they reach out to voters, especially those not living in big cities. That part is true. If you look at the map of the voters, Republican versus Democrat, Hillary was concentrated in all those cities, all those liberals, all the places where election fraud is real easy to do. You can't get illegal immigrants to vote in the rural areas because in the rural areas, everybody knows everybody showing up at the polling place. They're going to realize a strange face has walked on in claiming to be somebody that they aren't. So they focused on the cities. But that still is ignoring the real issue. And I have a message to soon-to-be former President Obama. Hillary's reach toward voters, while clearly flawed, is not why she lost. She lost because of Benghazi, election fraud, the secret private server with classified material, using the Clinton Foundation as a cover for tax evasion, hiring her cronies, taking bribes from foreign countries, arming the Muslim Brotherhood and hiring them in the White House, Whitewater, the Watergate Committee, Vince Foster, shady commodities deals, funding of neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, leading to the toppling of the democratically elected president, and the biggest crisis that country has had since World War II, turning Libya into chaos, mastermind of the so-called Arab Spring that only brought chaos, death, and misery to the Middle East and North Africa, leaving 4 Americans to die in Benghazi, encouraging and supporting the murders of Palestinians and the destruction of their homes by Israel, the funding and arming of terrorists in Syria, the destruction and destabilization of Syria, giving the order to U.S. lapdogs in Turkey and Saudi Arabia to give sarin gas to the moderate terrorists in Syria that was used on civilians and blamed on Assad. And on and on and on and on and on, ending with looting the White House furniture and silverware when Bill Clinton left office, which they were eventually forced to return. That's why Hillary Clinton lost. It wasn't the strategy. It wasn't the failure to reach the rural areas. It's the fact that we, the American people, have decided we have had enough of decades of Clinton-Bush corruption. We're done with the narcocracy. It is time for it to go into the dustbin of history. Now, Hillary Clinton is still out there promoting war and how we've got to get tough with all these other countries. We've got to do that. All right, Hillary, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit. The U.S. public opinion has gone the other way. We're anti-militarist. We're anti-interventionist. We're a war-weary people. We have had almost 15 years of seeing our kids coming back in wheelchairs and cheap metal boxes draped with American flags made in China. And we've had enough. Now, I mentioned this article earlier in the show. This appeared over in Gumshoe News. Why this Earth-first social liberal voted for Donald J. Trump. And this is a very good, insightful analysis. Basically saying that the Democratic Party today doesn't really represent the interests or even liberalism. They just adopted the label. And then they go on in to basically say, back in the 1960s, the liberals really were the intellectual elites. But since then, everybody who wants to have the pretense of being an intellectual, they call themselves a liberal. Ding, I'm a liberal. All of a sudden, I'm an intellectual elite. You should do what I tell you because I'm a liberal. Wearing the skin of the leopard, as it were. And we see liberals like the ones that we're dealing with here. I listen to NPR, the liberal radio station, therefore I know everything that's going on. They're narrow-minded, they're uninformed, and arrogant in their ignorance, and that makes them dangerous. Paul Craig Roberts is out there with an article on how Trump's opponents see everyday, normal Americans. You, me, Claire, your neighbors, everybody. We're all seen as deplorables. We're seen as inferiors by Hillary and her people because they cling to that liberal label as if it automatically confers a higher social standing, which is why they like to wear that. But the reality is, despite all this propaganda about KKK rallies and all the rest of it, Trump isn't going to do any of the things they're claiming he's going to do. He's got a country to fix. And that's going to be his top priority. Why? Because his entire adult life he's been a businessman, and he knows what's good for business, what is bad for business, and that's what he's going to be focusing on. Now, we are still seeing out there this idea of President Obama issuing a blanket pardon for Hillary and all of her cronies to end all the investigations. And Hillary supporters are out there saying, oh, yes, the Constitution gives the president the right to pardon people who haven't been charged, haven't been convicted, even if the president doesn't know what they did. Wrong again. Because if you go back to the Constitution, there is a limit on the president's ability to pardon. He cannot pardon an impeachment. And I know all of us here think of impeachment in terms solely of the president himself, but that's not true. Any civil officer can be impeached by the United States Congress, and the president cannot pardon it. The vice president can be impeached. Supreme Court justices can be impeached. There's talk about impeaching Loretta Lynch and James Comey. It's kind of a wasted effort at this point. And the president cannot pardon them. And implicit in that exception is the expectation that the president does know what he's pardoning. There is no such thing as a carte blanche in U.S. government. The president must know what he's pardoning. And that's where the liberal argument about a blanket pardon breaks down. Gerald Ford actually acted unconstitutionally when he wrote the pardon for Richard Nixon and all of his cronies to end our national nightmare. Nobody took it to court. Nobody challenged it because everybody in Washington, D.C. wanted the investigation into Watergate shut down before the links to the Kennedy assassination became public knowledge, because that would have seriously delegitimized the entire government. Just as today, they want to shut down all the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server and the foundation before the links to the selling of U.S. secrets to foreign governments surface, because the Clintons did it in 1996. No reason to think they weren't doing it again here. Now, the families of some of the people who died in Benghazi have now filed a lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. President Obama can pardon her for criminal acts that she's been charged and convicted of. He cannot save her from a civil lawsuit. Now, when this whole Benghazi thing was coming on out, we had the family members of the victims, like Pat Smith, basically coming on out and saying they were told by Hillary Clinton that this was a terrorist attack, and then Hillary came on out and said, oh, it was all because of that stupid little video. And then when challenged on it, Hillary Clinton basically said all these family members were lying. That's defamation. And so now Pat Smith and Charles Wood have sued Hillary Clinton for defamation, and I'll bet you some of the other family members are going to leap onto that as well. They're suing for defamation, wrongful death, because remember, there were assets ready to move to protect the lives of the people in the consulate. They were not given the go-ahead. They're suing Hillary Clinton for intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress, which is what happens when somebody goes on TV and says, oh, those family members, they're all lying. They're all lying about this. So they've got a pretty good iron-tight case here, and I know the Clintons have got a lot of money, and they'll be able to afford any resulting settlement. Apparently, one of the companies up in Silicon Valley, there was a CEO threatened Donald Trump, like I said, felony violation, Title 18. His own employees basically ejected him, said, you are not our CEO anymore. We're not even going to wait for the board of directors. You're gone. A lot of ramifications still coming out from Wanda Sykes, who got up there thinking that because she's a movie star, that, again, liberal, I'm automatically smarter and more intelligent than you are, and you should just shut up and listen to what I have to say. Went on a rant against Donald Trump. The audience started booing her, and she stands up there and shouts obscenities at her audience. So much for graciously accepting the results of the election and supporting democracy. And frankly, at this point, I'm going to go out of my way to not watch any movies or TV shows that Wanda Sykes happens to be in. Now, we're hearing more and more all across Europe the so-called Trump effect and how it's striking fear into the hearts of the ruling establishment. And the leaders of Austria and Italy, French and Germany are saying, oh, these right-wing populists, will of the people, democracy, we thought we'd gotten rid of that nonsense. The German media is out there saying Trump's election is the end of the world. Direct quote. Actually, it's the end of the New World Order, which is not quite the same thing, but that's why they're getting upset. Trump's clarion call to drain the swamp is ringing alarm bells in London. They don't want their swamps drained. I mean, corruption is all they know how to do. If they drain the swamp, they're going to have to find other careers. They don't know how to do anything. except be corrupt. We may need to establish a new charity fund to feed the former corrupt politicians because they're incapable of taking care of themselves any other way. Let's grab a real quick phone call. I know the lines are closed, but I'm going to go ahead and take this one. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, just to affirm your comment about liberals, I mean, they say they're the smartest ones in the bunch, but I've always found that many of the liberals that I've come in contact, even then my friends that are liberal, that they can't stand up and really debate the issues fact by fact, but they do base much of their argument on emotional issues, and it's all emotional. It's never fact-based. It's all by emotion.
That's how it was sold to them.
Very poor argument.
That's how it was all sold to them. It was the emotional appeal. Oh, Trump had locker room talk in a locker room 12 years ago. Disconnect brain from any other considerations. Thanks for the call, Steve. We're going to let you go. We'll be back in 3 minutes with more news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are closed. We're talking news here, and when we run out of news, we'll open the phone lines again. Now, the French foreign minister, and this is another indicator that Frexit is on the horizon, the French foreign minister is now telling the European Union to man up over the fact that Donald Trump won the election, and basically saying that the U.S. is going to be detaching itself from the European Union. And, of course, the European Union has been making huge amounts of money off of the U.S. taxpayer. Almost 3/4 of NATO's budget is covered by you, the taxpayer. And the French foreign minister, Mr. Védrine, is also saying it's time to scrap the plans for a European Union army. They can't afford it. Its only reason is to be the force to keep nations from leaving the EU, as they would like to do. Now then, down in Syria, the party is on, so to speak. Russia and Syria have kept their promise. They've launched massive attacks at al-Qaeda all over Syria. Russian air attacks. They're using their new aircraft carrier, their Admiral Grigorovich, and cruise missile attacks. They're using the Onyx in actual combat for the first time, and that is proving to be a very, very capable and accurate missile. And they're going into Aleppo, and all those U.S.-backed terrorists who thought Russia and Syria were bluffing about 24 hours, they're now getting a wake-up call. 500 militants so far have been killed in western Aleppo, and Syria is now coming on out and saying what has been obvious to everybody all along. The U.S. is violating Syria's sovereignty. Every time the U.S. sends any kind of military asset over the border or puts boots on the ground without the permission of the Syrian government, they are violating Syria's sovereignty. It is an act of war. And now they're threatening legal action against states and individuals that they hold responsible for the bloodshed in Syria. More on that a little tiny bit. Here is where you come to understand. And by the way, for those of you listening to this show, who are monitoring me on behalf of some government agency or political individual or George Soros or whatever, you need to pay attention to this story about your loyalty and what it may get you. Because President Obama has just given the Pentagon orders to start assassinating the commanders of the al-Nusra network in Syria. These are the people through whom the U.S. was covertly arming and supplying the terrorists trying to topple Assad. Now they're trying to clean house. They're trying to cover their tracks. So they're mopping them all up here. And I almost am on the verge of feeling sorry for al-Nusra, because not only are the Russians and Syrians pounding them right now, but their sponsors, the U.S. government, wants their heads on pikes. They're killing all the witnesses to the double dealing that Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were doing in Syria. I think that's the reason they let that consulate in Benghazi burn to the ground, to destroy the paper trail for the illegal gun running, which actually constitutes an act of treason by President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in that they were giving aid and comfort and weapons to the enemy during time of war. And we have had nothing out of the corporate media for years but how ISIS is our enemy, Al-Qaeda is our enemy, we're in a war on terror. Okay, and then you find out Obama and Hillary were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That technically meets the definition of treason. I love this little headline over in UAWire.org. U.S. Defense Secretary advises Trump against cooperating with Russia in Syria. I think it should actually read, U.S. Defense Secretary begs and pleads with Trump against cooperating with Russia in Syria. And everybody in the U.S. who was part of that military-industrial complex who was looking at, 100 years of war that they called for back there in the Project for the New American Century, it's all coming apart. What we'll really be telling is watching the stocks of the defense contractors. When they start plunging, you know the war is lost. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about what's going on in the various war zones. Labor leader Corbyn is out there basically saying, maybe it is time to start pulling back all these NATO weapons we've been piling up on Russia's border because it's expensive to do. We don't really need a new Cold War. We all know Russia has not been the aggressor these last 15 years, and it's time to pull on back. So Trump's not even in the White House, and look how much good he's already done in terms of pulling the entire world back from the abyss of a new world war. Now, a Russian lawmaker is out there saying that if the U.S. is serious about wanting to deal with the destabilized situation in Ukraine, the first thing they ought to do is sanction George Soros and Petro Poroshenko and a bunch of other U.S. officials who were behind this coup d'etat. It's time to start looking at what's really been going on in these countries, and most people already are. And that's why I am expecting that this attempt at a color revolution in this country is going to fall flat on its face, because for a color revolution to work, the general public must believe those causing the violence are somehow working for a better life for them. We already know that's not the case. They're coming across, their public image is coming across as a bunch of sore losers, crybabies. I mean, up in Portland, they're out there causing all that ruckus. Somebody did a survey of all the arrested protesters in Portland, found out most of them hadn't even voted. What does that tell you about what's going on up there? And all we're getting from the White House is, no, you don't understand. We are the good guys, and you are the bad guys. And our entire foreign policy is based on that. Now then, the International Criminal Court is now seriously starting to look at what's been going on in Afghanistan. Apparently, the Trump victory has convinced them that it's going to be actually politically okay to move ahead and start calling a spade a spade. And the ICC has issued a report saying that U.S. armed forces and the CIA may have committed war crimes by torturing detainees in Afghanistan. We know they were torturing them down in Iraq as well. And Fatou Bensouda issued this report from the ICC saying members of the U.S. Armed Forces appear to have subjected at least 61 detained persons to torture, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity in the territory of Afghanistan between the 1st of May 2003 and the 31st of December 2014. The report adds that CIA operatives may have subjected at least 27 detainees in Afghanistan, Poland, Romania, and Lithuania to torture, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity, and or rape. So there is something for all these liberals to go into denial over. The government that they support uses torture. They commit war crimes. That's the reality. They don't want to hear it. But that's the reality. And coupled with that, for those who are willing to say, well, okay, the government needed to use torture, they had a really good reason. There's never a reason to use torture. You talk to any intelligence expert, and they will tell you torture does not produce reliable intelligence. What torture gets you is the person being tortured saying whatever they think will stop the pain. If they need a politically expedient confession, that's when the torture comes on out. Remember when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed confessed to being the mastermind of 9/11? They only had to waterboard him 170 times to get that. Plus, they had to lock his kids in these dark metal boxes with stinging insects and let them listen to the kids screaming and crying. Now, those of you who are a parent, just think for a moment. You're in a cage, and on the floor in front of the cage, just out of your reach, is a metal box in which your child has been locked with a bunch of stinging, biting, venomous insects. Would you admit to being the mastermind of 9/11 to get that to stop? That's what's going on here. That's what was going on here. That's why we have the ICC. That's why we have laws against torture. Do you know the most successful interrogator in Nazi Germany never committed an act of torture? He used kindness. He gave the prisoners food. He got them permission to actually go on out and walk around the city and look at the German culture and the people and the stores to build sympathy for what the other side looked like. And he got all this information out of captured Allied prisoners of war, and not one of them had so much as a fingernail scratched. When World War II was over, this guy was grabbed up as part of Operation Paperclip and brought to the U.S. to teach our intelligence agencies these more efficient, productive means of getting information from the enemy. Why did they stop using it? Because they didn't need information, they needed confessions. Oh, yes, there are weapons of mass destruction. They were over in Saddam's rec room. His man cave is full of weapons of mass destruction. That's what the torture was used for. To get somebody to say something the corporate media could present to you as proof that we were fully justified invading Iraq. That's what it was all for. And I'm glad the ICC is starting to look at war crimes charges. I think it's time for some wanted posters to go on up, for some bounties to be offered. Let's get Dog over here. Forget about all these, bail jumpers and pickpockets and everything. Let's go after the war criminals. Dog, the bounty hunter, going after the war criminals. I think it's a good idea. Now, speaking of Ukraine, they're in yet another crisis. And this is a reminder that whenever George Soros and the U.S. come on in and have a color revolution and an overthrow, life for the ordinary people goes down. Because the whole goal of the overthrow is the economic exploitation of the country. Suck out all the wealth, natural resources, manufacturing, technology, and the wealth of the people. And there is now a third Maidan going on. Kiev is in a panic. They're mobilizing the army to use against their own people. And I think at this point it is time to move Ukraine into the failed column of U.S. George Soros interventions into other countries. Now, yesterday we were reporting on the result of some of the presidential elections in other countries in Europe, including Moldova, who elected a president who, like Donald Trump, wants to normalize relations with Russia, and like a switch was thrown, thousands of Moldovans are now in the capital, Chisinau, just protest. We want them out. And this smells like another Soros color revolution. We only believe in democracy when you elect the people we want you to elect. If you elect somebody we don't like, well, we're going to smash your country, destroy your standard of living. Down in Israel, a top IDF commander has told Israeli national television that a new Israel-Lebanon war is on the horizon, and this is the interesting quote. This was on Israel's Channel 2. Brigadier General Rassan Alian said, "The war will occur. It won't necessarily begin in Israel Events on other fronts are liable to spur it. In other words, any conflict anywhere in the Middle East, Israel's going to say, oh, we can start another war with Lebanon. They still want that Litani River. Now, on the economic front, we are hearing more and more nations all across Europe saying, you know, it's time to back off all this nonsense about sanctions against Russia. The sanctions have caused tremendous economic harm to the European Union member states. Russia was buying agricultural produce from them, manufactured goods. All the sanctions did was give Russia the impetus to become more self-sufficient, to redevelop their agriculture, to rebuild their factories. They don't need the global trade anymore. The EU nations got hammered between the Russian sanctions, the Iranian sanctions, that botched oil price war, and with Trump's election, everybody is now saying, okay, it's time to let this go. This wasn't working. Trump has the right idea. Peace through commerce. Peace through trade. Now, turning to the immigration front, and I'm still getting all these emails castigating me for some of the cartoons and graphics I make about the illegal immigrant problem, saying if you're opposed to the illegal immigrants, you're being racist, to which I respond, idiot, illegal isn't a race, is it? And they literally have grabbed onto this idea that anybody on planet Earth has a right to go anywhere else on Earth without any restriction. Really? You try that. You know, you want to be fair with the Mexican that want to come to live in this country? We should have an immigration policy that exactly reciprocates that of Mexico itself. You can't walk into Mexico and get free stuff. If you walk into Mexico without the permission of the government of Mexico, you are going to prison. Now, over in Europe, they're really looking at this refugee stuff because apparently over in Germany, there's a big scandal involving a Syrian refugee who has 4 wives and 22 children now living with him in Germany, and he is just living off the welfare system. They had another one up in Denmark, a Syrian man with only 3 wives and 20 children, is living off the welfare system, paid for by the Danes, just like this other guy in Germany is paid for by the Germans. It's not been a positive experience, and they're still out there saying, oh, it'll all work out. Trust us, we're liberals. We know, we believe it will all work out, and we're all going to clap hands and sit around the campfires and sing Kumbaya. It doesn't work like that. Here in the United States of America, up in Northern Virginia, an illegal immigrant ran a woman off the side of the road, grabbed her, took her into a ditch, and raped her over a 2-hour period. So much for open borders. Now, we're seeing all these cities dominated by liberal political ideology saying they're not going to help Trump. They're going to keep their sanctuary city status. Where our local police will not arrest and deport immigrants. The LAPD chief, Charlie Beck, said his department that's not our job. Well, technically he's right. It's the job of immigration and naturalization. But you better not get in their way when they come on in. And I guess the politicians in California are just as dependent on the illegal immigrant vote as Hillary was. Same thing for Chicago, same thing for Boston. Already everybody's out there saying, oh, you know, Trump can't build the wall. It turns out, going back to the George W. Bush administration, there actually was a budget set aside to build a wall along the border with Mexico. I still like my idea of putting crocodiles in the Rio Grande here. And it can be a fence, and you don't really need a fence and a wall. You just grab them as they come across, and you fling them back over. So I have an idea. We need to get all those guys who are building those punkin' chunkin' machines, the trebuchets, the catapults, the air cannons. I love the air cannons. The torsion machines, the centrifugal machines. Put them down there along Texas, Arizona, and let them enforce that border. and grant the prize to the longest distance and the highest bounce of an illegal immigrant being sent back across that border. The TV rights alone would pay for it all. Wouldn't cost the taxpayers a single dime for any of that. We'll have to rename it. I couldn't find any way to get illegal immigrant to rhyme with chunkin', but we'll come up with a name. And you're welcome to send in your suggestions here. But on a more serious note, you need to remember, President Dwight D. Eisenhower absolutely stopped all illegal immigration coming in from Mexico with his Operation Wetback with only 10% of the resources that Obama has. And you can stop the illegal immigrants. Stop giving them free stuff. Stop giving them a reason to come up here. And just say, if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to apply for welfare. You're not allowed to have a driver's license. You're certainly not allowed to vote. And I do think this idea of an anchor baby has to be looked at very carefully. Because I don't think any other country has a law in which you can sneak into a country illegally, pop out a child, and then be allowed to stay. I think the United States may be the only one. It's certainly not the norm. And if you create a loophole like that, it's going to be used. Women are going to get dragged up here and made pregnant immediately in order to cement their position in our culture. And again, I want to be very clear here. I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to come to this country who comes in through that legal process so that we, as a country, can screen out the MS-13 gang members. We can screen out the rapists. We can screen out the crazies, the people with the criminal records. We can screen out the ones who are carrying highly contagious infectious diseases. And I'm going to close this segment by one more time reading you that wonderful quote from Theodore Roosevelt. In the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he's an American but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. Theodore Roosevelt, 1907. I cannot find fault with a single word of any of that. If you come to this country legally, you are welcome. I hope we are not a disappointment. If you think you have a right to come here illegally, you're in for a major disappointment. Let's get those trebuchets fired up, boys. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a listener has corrected me. Apparently, Canada also has the anchor baby tradition, although it is currently under a tremendous amount of criticism because of what is being called birth tourism by the Chinese. So I think it's time for a rethink on that. That somebody will sneak into a country, have a kid, and then, I get to stay. Now then, getting on back to war crimes and so forth, the United Nations has now denounced the inhuman treatment of the Native American pipeline protesters, both how they're being attacked, tear gassed, tased, rubber bullets, for expressing their opinion, which should be protected under the First Amendment. And apparently the conditions under which the arrested protesters are being kept are seen as substandard by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of freedom of association and peaceful assembly. So now the UN is getting in on the case. All right, we're going to take one phone call, then we are going to close the phone lines again. Errol in the Netherlands, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Where do I need to start off?
Well, I can't tell you. You're the one who dialed into the show.
Yeah, because you are talking about, I want to say, the indigenous people with their graveyards. Well, you can do not such a thing. But yeah, that's, okay. Okay. What I want to talk about Donald Trump.
Okay.
You know? I want just to say, not congratulations. We need to wait. We need to wait and see, because the inauguration is at January 20, I think.
Yes.
Next year, 2017. Okay. Then there will be 100 days. 100 days, and then we can check him out. What we now see from the mainstream, the mainstream media, the prostitutes, we can now learn. We can now learn exactly what they are trying to put in our minds at that time, before the 20th, I must say.
Of January. Well, our next threshold now is
because
December 19th. Okay, it's December 19th because of the Electoral College. We're almost at the end of the segment, and I'm sorry to cut you off here. But again, for me, you know, the end of the the end of the Clinton-Bush narcocracy is a victory that we can and should be congratulated on right now. We know they're trying to find some way to fight back. I don't think they can succeed. All they can do is cause a lot of damage and hurt a lot of people in the process, which is business as usual for them. As far as Donald Trump, at this point, Donald Trump at his worst is still better than Hillary Clinton at her best, in my opinion. And so I'm sure we're all going to be disappointed by Donald Trump. He's constrained by economic realities, and he's surrounded by people who want things to go on the way they always did before. But I think in the long run, he's going to prove to be one of the United States' best presidents in the spirit of a Harry S. Truman. We're going to be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And we're going to be talking... well, first of all, we're going to go back to the phones. We're going to take John in Barbados, and then we're going to close the phone lines until I run out of news. John, what's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. What a great day. I was listening to Gary Franchi, and he suggested that Nigel Farage would be the U.S. ambassador to the EU. I fell on the floor laughing. I hope it's true.
Well, there's a lot of rumors flying around right now, and it's hard to pin anything down. We know that the old neocons are trying to infiltrate Trump's White House. I think that was the argument that resulted in Chris Christie being demoted and Mike Pence being put in charge of the transition. But there's a lot of rumors. There's a lot of pressure trying to get them. But very little is actually finalized, and until it is, we shouldn't be jumping all over Donald Trump. I mean, the media is unloading on Bannon right now. I mean, they're out there screaming that he's an anti-Semite, he's a white nationalist, and basically what's going on here, of course, is Bannon, who's going to be Trump's top policy advisor, comes out of the independent media. The corporate media does not have an in the Trump White House, and that's why they're in a panic. They literally bet their network licenses on Hillary Clinton being the president and crushing out the upstart independent media for them, and now they're not going to get that, and that's why they're crying and screaming and whining and thrashing around right now.
Well, I keep telling most of my friends that whatever they're hearing over the net about the appointees to Donald Trump's cabinet, nothing is certain. He's not said who his team is. Nobody from the campaign has said who's there, apart from 2 appointees. That's it. Yeah, and it's kind of, well, we're hearing more and more that Trey Gowdy is going to be the Attorney General, which certainly I agree with. All of Hillary's supporters are going to find some reason to say, oh, Trey Gowdy, he's corrupt, he's this, he's that, he tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting, and you know, and the rest of that. But you're right, nothing is finalized, and it's kind of weird to see the media say Trump may be considering X for a cabinet position, and then they come back, how could Donald Trump even be thinking about having X as a cabinet position? It just shows he's got, and they literally are creating out of thin air reasons to attack him. Well, I think if Trey Gowdy does become the Attorney General, who's going to take his place? Because in that Congress, in that inquiries that is taking place, Troy Gowdy is the attack dog. He is going after whoever and whatever for the truth behind all these criminal activities and what have you.
Well, my understanding is well, he's certainly going to be far more potent as Attorney General than as the attack dog in Congress. But my understanding is that any member of Congress who has to leave before their term is over for a promotion, the governor of their state appoints a replacement that is seated until the next regular election.
Yep. Okay then, Michael. That's all I had. I just wanted to see if you'd heard anything about Nigel Farage being the U.S. ambassador to the EU.
I had heard that. But ultimately, it's going to depend on who is Secretary of State, because Secretary of State has a great deal of influence over who gets those ambassadorships. Although we all know from long history past, ambassadorships tend to be a plum that is handed out to supporters. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I would love to see Nigel Farage in that position. I agree with you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That's all I had.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. Very interesting little story that we're seeing coming out of AlexanderHiggins.com, talking about how all of these people being hired by Soros to just do all these protests all across America, they're actually having an impact on the jobless numbers. And it's kind of funny. And, of course, Hillary's fact checkers are saying it's absolutely a lie that anybody is being paid to show up at these protests. And the corporate media is out there saying, well, we're the real news and they're the fake news, so you can believe us when we tell you these are just ordinary citizens, blah, 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 blah. We've got it on tape. Some of these protesters saying, I don't know why I'm here. I answered an ad in Craigslist. I'm getting money to be here. I needed the money. I got to make rent. That's what's going on here. Now, Trump supporters are out there calling for boycotts of companies who are supporting these riots and protests and who continue to support Hillary Clinton as she tries to find some way to thwart the will of the American people and grab the White House for herself. Because she knows if she can't do it, she and her associates are looking at serious jail time. In fact, I think one thing we ought to be looking for is a bug out. On the instant that Hillary understands she's not going to be able to swing the Electoral College and that the color revolution in the streets of America has failed, she and Bill Clinton are going to be on an airplane to someplace without extradition. That's what's going to happen. We're going to do a shout-out here to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. We're still talking about politics. We're not taking any phone calls because I got a huge backlog of things to talk about. So Trump supporters are now out there saying it's time for boycotts. It's time for the American people to legally express their point of view. Now, obviously, these protesters are in violation of various laws, vandalism, damage, threats to kill the president-elect, which is a Title 18 felony. But we, the American people, have got legal means to bring pressure to bear. I was talking about this over the Super Bowl, having Lady Gaga as their halftime entertainment. Just start telling everybody you're not going to watch the Super Bowl this year because you want to see Lady Gaga. Contact the people who are advertising on the Super Bowl and saying, I know you're going to have a world-class commercial there because the Super Bowl is not just the Super Bowl of football, it's the Super Bowl of all the companies who make TV commercials. And I know because back when I worked for Robert Abel & Associates, I got a lot of my work onto the Super Bowl, and it was a big deal. So here's the thing. Just start calling the advertisers and saying, I'm not watching the Super Bowl this year because of Lady Gaga. You're wasting your advertising dollar. Meanwhile, Trump supporters are saying it's time to boycott Pepsi, Macy's, DreamWorks, and Netflix. It's kind of easy in my case. I don't drink Pepsi. The last time I was in Macy's, I didn't see anything I would want to buy in the first place. I don't have a Netflix subscription, but I am going to be keeping an eye out for DreamWorks stuff at this point. And apparently we need to start changing our business to NASCAR, cars made in America, all the rest of that. You can do it. Believe me that the corporate media, it will go on out there, but their weak spot are the advertisers. If you start calling up the advertisers and saying, or go to their website and write a comment, I am not watching the Super Bowl because of Lady Gaga, that will get filtered forward. And we should probably do that just to demonstrate the power of the independent media and the American people against George Soros organized rioting in the streets. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the establishment media has now declared war on the independent media. And they're out there taking the position, well, they're fake news. We're the real true news. They're the fake news. And like I said before, Saddam's nukes, Assad's gas, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, human-caused global warming. Hillary is leading by 12 percentage points, and they have the nerve to say we're the fakes. They have clearly not actually learned anything at all from what just happened in this election. They're just going to wipe the egg off their face and go back to being the establishment media, but now they're angry. They're angry, the independent media. We've got larger audiences than they do. CNN's viewership numbers dropped below those of the gardening channel at one point. Google has announced they're going to punish fake news websites by halting ads. They're not going to advertise on websites with fake news, meaning anything that doesn't fit the official narrative. And that's always the problem with all of this. Who gets to decide what is real and what is fake? I am certain that to Hillary Clinton, my article about Vince Foster is fake news, even though the recent release of the FBI's file on Vincent Foster validated all the points I made in questioning the story of a suicide. Oh, no, that's fake news. That's fake. We're not going to advertise with you. Too bad, Google. You never advertised with me in the first place. You've got no pull over my website. Deal with it. Now we're hearing talk about how the government wants to militarize social media so that social media only gives you what the government wants you to think now. I mean, this is the call for the end of the First Amendment, for the end of debate, for the end of discussion, for the end of different points of view, the end of diversity of opinion. They've already got control over the corporate media. They're trying to get control over the independent media. Good luck on that one. Now they want to take control of the social media. And we saw this already during this last election, where articles and tweets about Hillary's crimes and corruptions were being deleted because it was voter suppression to try and get people not to vote for Hillary Clinton just because she's a criminal and corrupt. And yet we see the hashtag assassinate Trump and hashtag rape Melania are surging all over the place because, after all, that's freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So, now then, in the world of computers, and we have had allegations of this before. As you know, Microsoft has had a major problem with Windows 10. They're trying to still get people to switch to it. Ever since the free upgrade and the arm twisting and in the dead of night upgrades stopped, nobody's actually buying it. Nobody's actually buying Windows 10 because of all the reported problems out there, concerns about spying, even more so than in earlier releases. And, of course, Windows 10 heralds the age of rented software. And that's a big problem. So Microsoft is trying to get everybody to switch from Internet Explorer to their new browser called Edge, which only works on Windows 10. And now there are allegations that Microsoft has purposely degraded Internet Explorer along with other elements of Windows 7 and Windows 8 to literally force people to accept Windows 10. Forget about what you want. You will accept Windows 10 and you will pay monthly rental on all your software. And I will tell you why that is a problem. In the days of perpetual licenses of software, software companies had an incentive to come out with a new and improved software package to keep getting your money. If they transition to a month-to-month rent on the software, that incentive is gone. They have no incentive to improve the product. They have no incentive to even fix the problems that are in the product. And I'll give you an example that has really hit us. I'm Claire's techie for her choir, and two of the pieces of software I use are Sonar X1 and Sibelius. Now, Claire composes her music on Sonar. It's a very powerful composing tool. When we try and export that Sonar file to Sibelius, half the lyrics disappear. The problem is with Sonar, because I've looked into the files. The MIDI events for the lyrics are there, but they're empty. It's obviously a coding issue. And apparently it's been going for a long, long time, and nobody seems inclined to fix it. They don't need to. Their established user base is paying month to month to month to month rental on the software. Software development is disincentivized. And what are we going to see? We're going to see other countries start to take over the lead in software development around the world and leave the U.S. behind, just like they left space exploration. We've been left behind in that. It was a very, very bad decision. I have still never been able to get my perfectly legal license of 3ds Studio Max to install on Windows 7. We're going on 2 years now, and all I get from the various companies, oh, it's their problem. We don't need to deal with this. It's not us. Some companies now that are doing the month-to-month rental on software, remember the good old days when they would actually send you a free update to fix the problems in the software? Now you have to pay for the update. If this problem is impacting your workflow, yes, we have a patch that will fix it that only costs blah, 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 blah. I think that needs to stop. Julian Assange is finally, after 6 years, getting a chance to present his side of the story in these allegations of sexual crimes that have basically resulted in him living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for all these years. And like so many of these other allegations, like the ones they were flinging against Donald Trump, it was a political weapon because the powers that be didn't like Julian Assange and what he was doing. Oh, and by the way, you remember that lawsuit against Donald Trump where he raped this 13-year-old girl on Jeff Epstein's island and it was going to go to court? The girl pulled the lawsuit, disappeared. Nobody can find her. It was a made-up job, and I suspect the same thing with Julian Assange. Now, I've had my doubts about Julian Assange, but at this point there's no question he has done a service to the world. And he deserves to be able to go on his way and continue his work. Julian Assange has now come out with a warning for all of us. Google is not what they seem. They do things the CIA cannot. The CIA technically is under limitations imposed by law that do not apply to corporations. And Assange is saying you need to be very, very careful about what Google is doing. I remember when they came out with that puff piece about Google, the internship, and it's a fun movie. And it makes Google look like the swellest, most fun place to work. But clearly, there is a dark side to Google. Feel the force. All right, we're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines now because I'm running to the end of the talking points, so we can take a few more phone calls for the end of the show here. We are continuing to see from climatologists and meteorologists who are not in the pay of Al Gore and his people that the globe is cooling at a record pace. We were talking yesterday about the World Meteorological Organization that is being cited as gospel truth in the corporate media, that 2016 was the hottest year on record ever since they invented the thermometer. And the World Meteorological Organization is not, in fact, a scientific body. It is a political one. It is the media front group for the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who are pushing global warming as one of the foundations to push for global government. You can't save the planet Earth by yourself. We will have to come in and constrain you to save the Earth from you icky-poo human beings. Sometimes these wacko ideas get out of control. Now, up in Stockholm, it is snowing, which November, yes, despite what the UK Independent said back in 2000, yes, we are still getting snowfalls. And in past years, Stockholm had a priority for clearing the snow from the streets. They would first clear the snow from the main roads and areas like construction sites, then they would move to pavements and cycle lanes. But feminists came on out and said, well, this is sexist because men are more likely to drive and women more likely to walk. Therefore, you should clear the pavements and cycle lanes first and leave the main roads to last. And as a result, Stockholm is in the throes of a major traffic problem with accidents happening on those still snow and ice-covered main roads. It's gotten so bad that the Green Party's Daniel Heldon admitted this was kind of a stupid idea, that gender equal snow removal had failed the city, and he's issued an apology to everybody who got injured or had their car damaged in all of this nonsense. It's amazing. Here's a story, and we've talked about this before. This is coming out of SITS show, S-I-T-S show, blogspot.com. Severe allergies to peanuts, eggs, and dairy directly linked to ingredients in common vaccines. And they're referencing a book, The Peanut Allergy Epidemic by Heather Fraser. And it starts out by asking a very simple question. Why is peanut anaphylaxis an epidemic only found in Western cultures? There are no cases of peanut anaphylaxis in India, where peanuts are like the main ingredient in most baby food products. 100 years ago, you couldn't find anybody allergic to peanuts. What has changed? We'll tell you when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about vaccines. We're talking about peanut anaphylaxis. And there's a book, The Peanut Allergy Epidemic by Heather Fraser, which is pointing out that peanut anaphylaxis, like autism, is, shall we say, overrepresented in Western cultures. And pointing out, 100 years ago, you couldn't find anyone allergic to peanuts. And now it's commonplace for parents to be sending EpiPens to school for the teacher and the nurse in case their child is exposed to peanut dust. You look at packages and they'll say food product was manufactured in a facility that processes peanuts, because one speck of peanut dust can trigger a fatal reaction. What is wrong with us that we would go into anaphylactic shock from a seemingly harmless food ingredient that didn't harm anybody 100 years ago? And the answer is very obvious. It's because peanut oil is used as a vaccine adjuvant. Now, peanuts are something that you are supposed to eat and digest, not inject directly into the bloodstream. And these vaccine adjuvants are added to the vaccines to provoke a reaction. And the result is that, in theory, you will develop an immune response to the active pathogen in the vaccine. But what's really happening is you're conditioning the body to develop an immune response to things we would normally eat, including peanuts and dairy products. And that's where all this is coming from. And Obama wants to make vaccines mandatory for the world. Well, I guess if the entire world is suffering peanut anaphylaxis, then they don't know why that's happening. It's just one of those weird things. It's evolution. We all used to be healthy 100 years ago. Now we're all sickly and weak, and it's evolution, or it's the will of the imaginary playmate in the sky. But don't you ever dare suggest that the reckless behavior of the medical industrial complex has anything to do with this, because then you're just a tinfoil hat kook conspiracy wacko who runs one of those fake news websites. Mea maxima culpa on that one. I mean, it's very, very obvious. We know that 100 years ago, autism was extraordinarily rare. Now it's almost 1 in 16. Peanut anaphylaxis was unknown 100 years ago. Now it's a raging epidemic. Good for business for those people selling EpiPens. And I think an area of concern has to be prescription antidepressants, which in certain individuals seem to work the other way, triggering acts of violence, suicide. We may be living in a country that is literally drugging itself to illness and insanity, all in the name of a fast buck. And remember, we're not talking about the street drugs you're finding out there on the corner. We're talking about the stuff prescribed by your doctor, sold to you by the pharmacy. There is an issue there, and it has to be dealt with. I'm wondering how many of Hillary's campaign workers, supporters, followers are on prescription antidepressants. Would explain a lot of the behavior we're seeing coming out of them. Now, looking past Donald Trump's upset victory, a lot of other laws got voted in this last election. Up in Sonoma County, they passed Measure M, which makes the growing and selling of genetically modified crops illegal in their county. Now, I'm sure that Monsanto is going to be pushing back on that, and it's going to be very, very difficult for farmers in Sonoma County to grow GMO-free crops when those GMO pollens are blowing in from states away. But at least it's a step in the right direction. Now, on the issue of Monsanto, there are more and more lawsuits regarding glyphosate. More about that when we come back. And aloha, welcome back to the show here. Very, very sad story just breaking. Apparently, anti-Trump protesters blocked an ambulance, resulting in the death of a 4-year-old girl's father. And Paul Joseph Watson is reporting on this thing, talking about a doctor saying, I had a patient die during transfer last night because our ambulance was stopped by protesters and had to drive an extra 45 minutes around the blocked roads. That is just terrible. That is just terrible. Anyway, back to this lawsuit against Monsanto's Roundup. Now, first of all, the World Health Organization has declared glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. And it's being spread all over when they use it in Roundup on the gardens. It gets into the food you are eating. There's no amount of washing the vegetables or even peeling them that's going to get it out. And there are agricultural workers who have been exposed to huge amounts of glyphosate. They are now coming down with cancer. They are now suing. And they should. A federal judge has just given the city of Spokane, Washington, the okay to go ahead and sue Monsanto. It's time for a pushback against the fascism that has been gripping our country for the last 30 years, where the corporations can do no wrong and we, the American people, can do no right. It's time for that to end. Now, GM products are getting another black eye. You would think the government of India, after the BT cotton disaster, would be exercising some caution regarding any GM crops. But now they're dealing with this case of GM mustard, which is the first genetically modified food crop that's been allowed into India. It's a commercial food crop. And apparently there's been a big stink regarding the tests for safety. They found altered data, fraud. It was described as monumentally bogus on the part of the government trying to get this thing approved, and it's gone all the way to the Supreme Court of India. The government is now saying that they will go along with whatever the Supreme Court decides. And, of course, this will have wide-ranging implications for India's food industry and agriculture. People are going to be very, very concerned about consuming any mustard products that might have even been anywhere near India. And it's another reminder that when you have these super large corporations that have the money and political pull to simply bypass the laws that exist for our safety, you're going to get into trouble. Now, getting on back to Podesta's leaked emails, they show that Hillary Clinton's campaign was heavily funded by Monsanto. And Monsanto is a good friend of Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. And I wonder what favors Hillary Clinton did for Monsanto following those donations. Was she instrumental in getting the Indian government to approve the GM mustard? Now remember, we've seen this kind of corruption before. All the way back in Arkansas, there was another scandal called Bloodgate, where Governor Bill Clinton was allowing blood to be harvested from Arkansas prisoners to manufacture medicines for hemophilia. Unfortunately, the prisoners were not being screened medically, and they were passing on hepatitis and HIV to the hemophiliacs who were getting the machine. And everybody was making money because nobody was actually doing any testing. That was a big stink. Donald Trump is right. It is a swamp, and it actually was all along. The land under Washington, D.C., in George Washington time, it was a malarial swamp. That's why he deeded it to the U.S. government for the new capital city. There was nothing he could do with it. Now, down in South Carolina, as you know, they had serious flooding following their last major storm. And the Red Cross is now starting to shut down their shelters. And FEMA has gone on in. And what are they doing? Reopening the shelters? No, they've opened a loan window. FEMA's response to this natural disaster is to go on out and get these people in South Carolina back on that debt hook. And it seems like this lust for money really is the root of all evil, because we're seeing all these corporations making decisions solely based on extracting more money from we, the American people, at a time when we just don't have it. And that is probably the biggest failure of the money junkie philosophy of the last 20 years. The idea that you could go on sucking wealth out of the American people at the same time you took away their high-paying jobs. Was there nobody in Wall Street, was there nobody in Washington, D.C. who realized that was an unworkable formula? Or were they all just doped up on their prescription antidepressants and couldn't see what was right in front of their face? Like I said, I don't envy Donald Trump the job he has in front of him. Making America great, it's not going to be an easy process. He's going to have to bring back our manufacturing. That's not going to happen overnight. It's not like people just walked out of those factories, turned the lights off, and locked the doors. Most of those factories, the machinery has been stripped off and sold for scrap or sold to foreign countries. Most of those factories are empty, corroded hulks. And all those nations that gratefully accepted the lead in manufacturing from America's Wall Street wizards are not going to be so silly as to allow it to come back easily. We're already hearing friction from China. They love manufacturing iPhones and things because it creates jobs, keeps their people employed, keeps them happy. They don't want to give that up. And again, that is why I am fully on board with Donald Trump's ambitions for NASA. He wants to end its Earth monitoring mission, which is really just a fancy name for supporting the global warming propaganda. And he wants to retask NASA to go on out there into the solar system, see what's there. Go back to Mars, look for indigenous life. Go to Europa, look for life. I think they should go to Titan, see if there's something swimming in those methane pools. But all of this is not so we see the American flag back out there in the solar system, joining all those other countries who have now leapt beyond us in space exploration. And it's not, it's only marginally because I'm scientifically curious about what they're going to find. I'm old enough to remember how the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s that created so many jobs and much wealth in this country was based on the technology incubator called the Apollo Moon Program. And we need another one. We dare not get into a game of playing catch-up with established industrial methods and technologies. We could be 100 years trying to catch up to nations like China We have to leapfrog ahead. We need to make that next revolutionary breakthrough into photonics, for example, to get past overheating problems on computers. Build computers that are 1,000 times smaller than they are today, don't have to worry about cooling fans. New materials. Find out if aerogel can actually be used for something. But we need to do it. And in solving the problems on how to get down below the ice on Europa, how to look for life in the methane pools of Titan, how to get on out there and maybe see if there's something worth digging for, mining on those asteroids. We're going to solve these problems, and we're going to develop new technologies which will bring us new industries, new products, new factories, new jobs. Everyone's scrounging about natural resources here on planet Earth, and it's getting a little bit strained. But do you know what resources are out there in our solar system? You want to talk about hydrocarbons? Jupiter's atmosphere is filled with them, more than we could ever use. How about a series of giant tankers that go out to Jupiter, skim along the upper atmosphere, fill up with hydrocarbons, and come back to Earth? Drop them off at the refineries. It may sound far-fetched, but then back in the 1800s, could anybody have envisioned this network of giant ocean supertankers constantly traversing the globe, taking oil from one part and putting it to another? Why not do that with Jupiter? It's only a question of scale. Everybody loves gold. Oh, let's start looking at those asteroids. There might be some minerals out there that be much easier to dig them there and drop them down to Earth than to dig down into the Earth and bring them back up. It just takes the will to do it. I noticed that on National Geographic, Smithsonian, I think it was, they're starting to run a dramatization of the first human expedition to Mars. And I think it's great that they're thinking about Mars. But again, it's not to put a flag up. It's only marginally the science we will learn about life on other worlds. It's about that leapfrog into a whole new technological era that will let us recreate the 30 years of the tech boom in the United States of America that has given us things like the watch, the iPad, the iPhone. 25, 30 years down the road, people will look at the iPhone and see it as primitive as the dial desk telephone is today. There's a lot of potential out there. Meanwhile, I do have an issue to pick with National Geographic. They were talking about Mars and research here on Earth about why Mars became lifeless, because the evidence is clear. At one time it had oceans and an atmosphere and probably had life. I know it still does. Dr. Gilbert Levin knows it still does. But they're saying, oh, what happened? Was it global warming or global cooling? No, actually, if you look very carefully at the topography of Mars, at some point in its past, it got slammed by a huge asteroid that literally bent the entire planet. If you look at the Tarsus region where all the volcanoes are, and it's this great uplifted plateau, on the opposite side of the planet, there's an area called Utopia that is a depression. And were I planning missions to Mars, I'd be going to Utopia and looking for evidence of impactites, shocked quartz, things like that. I think that's what happened to Mars. And yes, it could happen here. But I do think we need to do that. Meanwhile, bad news for people in Rome. They've been having all these problems with all these earthquakes. There is a dormant volcano outside Rome that is starting to rumble and reawaken. And Italian seismologists, volcanologists, are very concerned because an eruption of the Colli Albani volcanic system, it's only 10 kilometers from Rome. It could bury Rome the way Vesuvius buried Pompeii. And it's a real situation. And, it's amazing when you see the Earth do these things, whether it's, the big quakes they're having down in New Zealand or the volcanoes. And you begin to realize that man's ability to influence nature is still very, very limited, contrary to the claims of the human-caused global warming fanatics out there. And in a lot of ways, I look at Al Gore and his ilk and their suggestions about how we can lock the climate into something that we have arbitrarily decreed to be perfect. Reminds me of when Caligula had his soldiers stab the ocean with their spears because he declared war on Neptune. And it makes a good show, but it doesn't really have an effect. Until the global warming fanatics can put a thermostat on the sun and literally move the Earth's orbit around, climate will always change. And there's not a thing they can do to stop about it. And they're not interested in stopping it. They just want to find a way to make money off of it, because that's what politicians do. Now then, let's see. That old one about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton walking into a bar is making the rounds again. Even Paul Joseph Watson had it. That's a good one to be saving, and I'll tell you why. Because when you're dealing with these closed-minded liberals who are still convinced that Hillary Clinton is sweetness and light and a virgin princess, and Donald Trump is the next incarnation of Cthulhu, you need to remind them. The reason Hillary Clinton lost this election had nothing to do with outreach, had nothing to do with rhetoric, had nothing to do, a little to do with nationalism. It really had to do with the Clintons' long history of crimes and corruptions. Benghazi, election fraud, the military not getting their votes counted, that happened. The secret private email server that had classified information on it, and according to Guccifer, at least 10 foreign IPs were logged into that machine, helping themselves. The question I want to know is, were the owners of those IPs also at the same time making generous donations to the Clinton Foundation? One of the reasons that the ultra-corrupt and the ultra-evil can get away with what they get away with is the inability of ordinary people to imagine that anybody could be that evil, that corrupt. Certainly during Nazi Germany, when the Order of the White Rose was trying to get word out about what Hitler was really doing, they met a lot of resistance from the German people who said, it couldn't be. No human is that evil. No human is that corrupt. And yet we know he was. Same thing in the Soviet Union during Stalin's time. The curse of all political power is it attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't have it. And the more powerful those positions are, the stronger the lure. And you will find people who are willing to do anything to acquire those positions of power, and once they have them, equally willing to do anything with them. That's why the Founding Fathers, when they designed this country, authority and power was diffused across the entire nation, residing in the local governments, in the state governments. There was never supposed to be an all-powerful central government in this country because the Founding Fathers understood what evils would result from that central tyrannical government. And we've seen it all with our own eyes. And hopefully we'll all shout a warning to future generations to keep an eye out for it. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today, and I want to jump on back to Donald Trump and his transition. And I had speculated before that the reason Chris Christie was demoted as head of the transition team and Mike Pence was moved into that command slot was that Chris Christie was going along with trying to infiltrate Trump's White House with as many of the old guard neocons as he could, and Trump apparently spotted that and said, "You're fired." And we are now seeing from Salon that Donald Trump's transition team has dropped every single one of Chris Christie's appointees. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. Now, the corporate media is saying, oh, this is Trump being angry and arrogant. This is a terrible thing. How could he do that? Chris Christie worked for months on this. So you can almost smell the panic here. But what's going on is that the old guard neocons, the old hardliners, they wanted to try and infiltrate Donald Trump's White House so they could hijack his presidency and keep him on track with their agenda, and they have failed miserably. And we have to score one for the Donald on this. that he was sharp enough to pick up on it and had the courage to do something about it. So anything that you are being told about who's going to be in the cabinet and who's going to be in this and that, it's still mostly rumor. We know the chief of staff is going to be Priebus. We know the top advisor is going to be Bannon. We are pretty sure that Trey Gowdy is going to be the AG. Beyond that, it's all speculation. But all of these are good people. Now, I know they're trying to push the idea of Rudy Giuliani as Secretary of State, and I know most of you listeners have concerns about Giuliani because of the going-wrongs with 9/11. But Giuliani was a tough prosecutor and an equally tough negotiator, and I could see an argument for kind of overlooking the 9/11 thing, unless his name comes up in a subsequent investigation, and get somebody in there who can do the job, who can go on out there and talk to these other nations that are still trying to go the globalist route and open borders and the rest of it and say, no, we're laying down the law. This is a new United States of America, and the United States of America is its top priority, and you might as well get used to that right now. But again, the corporate media is out there denouncing this. They thought they had these neocons inside Donald Trump's administration, and they're all being given the heave-ho, every single one of them. They're out. And that is a very, very good thing. It does show Trump's White House intends to be independent. It tends to be free of the old guard interference and influence. And I can understand why the establishment is panicking, because Trump is turning out to be every bit the nightmare they thought he might be. Pull back from war with Russia. Trey Gowdy is AG going after Hillary and her corruptions. Oh, it's going to be a fun 2017. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Remember, you are all part of the independent media. Take what you learn here and spread it all over the place. Working together, we can shout down the corrupt corporate media. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.